The devastating January fires in Los Angeles were frightening to watch, let alone experience. Entire neighborhoods vanished almost in the blink of an eye, and the scale and swiftness of the inferno were shocking. In the aftermath, a full spectrum of loss emerged. Some people returned to their homes shocked to find them still standing, while all around them, neighboring structures had been reduced to ash, leaving their residents homeless. The scale of destruction is overwhelming to process and make sense of in an effort to find perspective. Watching the news and hearing the stories has led me to wonder, when you've literally lost your home and all of your physical belongings, how do you cope, grieve, and move forward? We mostly think of grief when it comes to the loss of a friend or family member. But what about grieving the life you used to lead, the community you are a part of, and the memories and family heirlooms that are now gone? How does grief unfold with these types of losses? That's what we'll discuss on this episode of the What About Grief podcast. I'm Larry Holm. My guest is Megan Katerjian, who sadly lost her own home to the Eaton fires. Megan is the CEO of Door of Hope, a LA-based organization that is one of the only homeless providers to offer shelter for families together in their own private unit, including single moms, single dads, and two-parent families together with their children. I can only imagine, Megan, how precious your time is as you and the nonprofit that you are running are helping so many people following the fire. So I appreciate you coming onto the podcast. So welcome.
Thanks, Larry. It's an important topic, so thanks for covering it.
Yes, thank you for coming on. And first off, and most importantly, how you and your family are all safe and healthy from these fires. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank God no one was injured. We did not leave with, fire right behind us like so many of our friends did. So we're all safe and housed.
So you're in the Altadena area, and the Eaton fires began on January 7th. Can you kind of break down the days leading up to the 7th in regard to, did you get any warning signs that there were high winds coming and the possibility maybe of a pending fire?
Certainly, we knew about the winds and, the risk of that. So I had just the day before made sure that there was nothing that could fly through a window with the wind picking up, and taken in all the cushions and stray patio furniture and things like that. I had friends leaving work early to make sure that their house was the same, way everything was pinned down. We operate 4 shelters at Door of Hope, and so our facilities crew was making sure about things like that. But there was not really huge talk of a possible fire. I mean, it's always a risk living in Southern California, but the wind was our big concern.
Where was your anxiety level?
Before the fire, I would say pretty low. I was more annoyed that it was interfering with my hiking routine.
Tell me a little bit about your home. How long had you lived there, and was it a place that you truly felt like it was a home and kind of represented the makeup of your family?
Yeah, it feels now like I had just moved in. I had moved in on the week of the 4th of July. And it did represent my family. It was a new composition of my family because I had gone through a separation last year. And so it was a home for just me and my 2 kids. And it was the same neighborhood, but a mile north. I had always wanted to live close to the mountains, and so I got my wish, and it was really perfect. I had spent the last 6 months leading up to the fire, doing all of the projects, furnishing it just like I wanted, paying attention to the kids' space and play space and outdoor space and all of that, and it did really feel like home.
Yeah. So kind of walk me through the day your home burned down. Was it actually on the 7th, or was it a day or 2 later? And did you receive the evacuation orders that we would see on the news?
It's hard to say exactly when it burned down. I think it was probably sometime around 4 a.m. on the morning of the 8th. I had left the house at about 8 p.m. or so the night before. And the reason I left early was because I was terrified of sleeping through an evacuation order
Mm.
and, having my life in danger. And so my friend had reached out, and the kids actually weren't with me that night. They were with their dad. And so my friend reached out, and I went over to her house. So it wasn't until the next day that I found out it had burned.
And when you left, did you pack things up thinking this could be it, or did you leave some maybe some important things behind, thinking, this might not be as serious as I think, and I'll be able to get that stuff at a later date?
I absolutely did not think I would be coming home to nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, fires happen in Southern California very commonly, and they're always nipped in the bud. I mean, not always. They're frequently nipped in the bud before any homes are ever taken out. And the fire had started like well over 2 miles east of us.
Mm.
And so for me, the homes right there at the hot spot were at risk, and my home was not at risk. But, there was smoke, there was electricity going on and off. And so I knew, because of the wind, maybe the fire wouldn't get put out for a couple days or whatever. But maybe I would be displaced from my house for a couple days. And so I grabbed 3 days worth of work clothes, a couple pairs of workout clothes. And then at the last minute, I was like, I shouldn't be completely stupid. I should at least grab my important documents folder. And so I grabbed that and a few pieces of jewelry and left.
Wow. So there wasn't the chaos for you in regard to like, oh my God, I've got 10 minutes to get out of here like some people went through. It was a little more of a, I guess, comfortable process to just grab what you thought you needed and then left.
Right. Yeah. It was pretty measured. I mean, I think I almost wish, I'm grateful that I didn't leave in chaos, but I almost wish I had left a little bit later and been able to process how serious it possibly was.
Yeah.
I did live in an area where no one in my neighborhood got an evacuation order. So, I thank God that I did leave when I left, but would have certainly appreciated the opportunity to go back and take a lot of things that I didn't.
Yeah. So how then did you find out that your home had burned down?
So the next day I was at my friend's house, actually a coworker at Door of Hope. And, we were watching the news. We were managing the evacuation of 2 of our shelters because they were in now the fire warning zone, and we were making preparations for that. And meanwhile, I'm getting texts here and there, fires on Wapello, fires on this street, fires on that street. Wapello is my street. And nervous, of course. And so I thought to text my 2 neighbors, and eventually got a text back from my next door neighbor saying that my house was gone.
Mm. And when you heard that, what were kind of some of the first emotions that came to mind? I mean, I can't imagine kind of processing those words and then the loss of losing a home.
Yeah, there was like a second of shock, and then just I just wept.
Yeah.
And I'm not a weeper. I'm actually I'm grateful that I did because I was with coworkers, right? I mean, they're friends,
Sure.
but I was in work mode.
Right.
And but yeah, no, I just I don't think I've ever cried that hard.
Yeah.
When I found out everything was gone.
Did depression ever kind of set in afterwards? Or was it just like life sped up and you had your work and you had your kids and you had to just kind of keep moving forward? Were you able to think about what really happened?
I mean, it's still coming.
Yeah.
I'd say, now is the time I would feel at more risk of depression than right in the aftermath. I mean, certainly I remember, the next day just waking up and it's like, I've had this experience where someone I care about dies, or something horrible has happened and you wake up and there's that like moment where you remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for a couple of days after that, that was my wake up experience. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was hard.
And so how long was it until you were able to go back to your street and see what happened to your home?
Um, I don't know when I could have gone back. Um, I, immediately just disengaged from the news, honestly, and I didn't want to go back. I was actually really scared of um, seeing the burn. I was really triggered every time I would watch the news and see the fires.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't go back until I got a call from a service that I had signed up for that was offering to basically go through the rubble and look for remnants and mementos and anything that was salvageable.
Hmm.
And so I got a call. This was, gosh, I don't even remember, probably 2 to 3 weeks later. And they wanted to meet me the next day. And um, I just started crying. Like every time I would think about going up there, I knew I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
But I also knew that it was a really important opportunity for me to just, see what else is there and hopefully get some kind of closure. And so I called up a dear friend who's, and I had to tell her, I don't know if you have capacity for this, but you're my person if you're willing to be. She, her two kids had lost their homes as well. I wanted to be sensitive to that, but she agreed to meet me, and we went up there the next day.
And what was that like to see, the home that you had bought and created for you and your kids that you were happy living in, all of a sudden, just, I guess, ashes? How did you even handle that?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was painful for a second, and then I think I kind of just shut down. I had already seen a picture
Mm.
of it, so I knew what to expect. Um, I think the hardest part of that, honestly, was before I got up there, I knew I didn't want to stay while they dug through everything because I felt like that would be excruciating. And so what I did instead was I drew a map and I wrote out all of the things that I hoped they would find. Um, but that was really painful, right?
Yeah.
Because I knew that there was such little chance that they would find everything. So it's like you work up a sliver of hope, or like, oh, I could have taken that,
Right. Right.
I thought about taking that and I decided not to. So there were those kind of moments, I think that was the harder thing. And then while they were digging, we had to stay in the area. So I used that as my opportunity to just drive around and see the devastation. And that was really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a war zone.
You had mentioned you kind of shut off watching the news because it set off triggers. And I was wondering, does PTSD kind of come into play at all now when you smell smoke or hear a fire engine? And does it kind of suck you back into that moment?
Fire engines for sure. I haven't smelled smoke, thankfully.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the most triggering thing is the news, and probably because because I haven't watched so much of it, but just the images of the fire blazing and the devastation. Or I was at a meeting last night where they were kind of tracing liability and culpability and where the fire started. And I think those moments are just triggering and infuriating to know that this was such a small thing when it started, and could have been prevented in the first place. And the wind was just the perfect storm that made it so much worse.
Yeah. Can you describe kind of the feeling of all of a sudden being homeless? It's homeless in a different way from, I guess what we see of homeless people on the streets, but in many ways you truly are homeless and you have to figure out, where am I and the kids going to sleep tonight and tomorrow and next week? And the sense of really not having anything but what you were able to take from your home before you left.
Yeah. It's incredibly stressful to be homeless, and it's also given me so much insight and empathy for what our clients at Door of Hope go through all the time.
Right.
I have a little car. It's kind of a hybrid, mini hybrid SUV. That's really more like a hatchback size. And I had to, stop accepting donations because I had no more room in my car. Right?
Yeah.
That was it. That was all I had.
Yeah.
And so there were things like that. I went to San Diego for some days, and then I went to Goleta near Santa Barbara for a week, maybe a little bit more. And that was important because I didn't want the kids to be around all that smoke and locked down. And the beach is just a very calming place for me.
Yeah.
And then just to be out where I could actually walk and where there was good air quality was really important. But the moving constantly was absolutely exhausting. And just not knowing what's next. I'm sure it's hard for everybody. I know I've talked to a lot of women who it seems to be harder for, not to gender stereotype, but I think I'm a nester. My aesthetics and my environment and surrounding and getting a house just so is very important to me. I suspect, maybe it's more important to women in general. And so I had just a really hard time not being able to plant and nest and not knowing what the future would look like, and then just creating that comfortable space for the kids too. It was hard to not have that. It is hard to not have that.
I can imagine. How do you grieve and cope with this loss of a home and loss of kind of a daily routine and the unknown? How have you dealt with your grief, and how do you cope?
Yeah, you should probably ask me that 6 months from now.
Okay, we will.
Because at the same time, I think I've had to figure out, how long can I really be on leave for, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a CEO of a nonprofit. That is a limited opportunity. Those weeks are limited. How long, can I not jump into action and do homeowners insurance and FEMA and all of that kind of stuff? I mean, there were so many urgent things that had to be done. And so I think out of survival, I had to kind of compartmentalize. And so I don't know that I've really taken that out of the box and sat down and journaled and mapped out, everything that I need to grieve.
Yeah.
So the action is kind of postponing that, delaying that. And then there's also, I think I find it hard to grieve when I can think of 100 stories that are 10 times worse than mine.
Yeah.
And know those stories very personally and intimately, and then know or imagine a lot more. And so I think that part of me being able to grieve is just giving me permission that, it actually doesn't matter that there are 100 stories that are 10 times worse. Mine is awful. And I need to be sad about that and grieve it.
Yeah. I know for me, obviously our grief is different. I lost my wife, Sarah. You lost a home and possessions. And I know after she died and after the funeral and after everyone left, I slowly began to start my grieving. And I think for you, it sounds like, once you get through X amount of weeks and months of the business of trying to get you and your family back on track, and also all the great work that Door of Hope does as well, it might just one day hit you, right? When you least expect it. And that's maybe when your grieving might start.
Yeah. Or just, come in waves.
Comes in waves, yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely does that.
In there. And and just, even I think when you suffer a loss so profound like you did, your wife, it's a yes, it's a single incident and a single person, but then, years later, you're remembering little things about her that you miss or little. And I think that it's similar to that when you lose a home. I don't even remember everything that I should be missing.
Right.
Right? Until the moment, oh yeah, like my grandma's this or my grandfather's that, or,
Right.
all those things that I just can't even process right now.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. Like, people will say, oh, you might have had a favorite sweatshirt that you had for 15 years that was worn in and perfect and had a certain smell and it brought you comfort. Yes, you can go buy that sweatshirt again, but you're losing so much more. It's a history, right, of your favorite article of clothing or piece of jewelry or a family heirloom. Can you kind of just speak to that of not being able to get back some very precious items that you lost?
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly that kind of stuff. The furniture, the clothes for the most part, can all be replaced. Unless it's my grandfather's grandfather clock that was given to my parents when they gave him his first grandchild, and then my parents gave it to me when I gave them their first grandchild. And those kind of traditions that were meant to be passed down then to my own kids. My daughter is most upset about a cross, a little opal and gold cross that belonged to my grandma. And I used to let her wear it on special occasions and told her that when she turned 16, I would give it to her. And so it's all of those kind of things. I remember even grabbing my photo albums. I did grab my photo albums.
Oh, good.
But they're all on Shutterfly, and so they all could have been reprinted. Right above my photo albums on a shelf that I didn't even see somehow was my baby book that my mom had created for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't even think about it. And so I was really the keeper of the family heirlooms. And my parents had, sent out a moving truck some years ago with all of those kind of things. So, there was certainly big pieces of furniture that I could have never taken with me anyway, but there were a lot of little things like my grandmother's painting and a china set and a ceramic tea set that my great aunt made for me when I was a kid and I had given to my daughter, and all those kind of things that are really painful because you're right, you can't ever get those things back.
You're listening to the What About Grief podcast. We will get back to the conversation in a moment. But I wanted to remind you that you can write to us at the show with your thoughts, ideas, or a description of your own grief journey. We appreciate hearing from you, and we like being connected with our listeners. So please reach out to us via email at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com. Also, if you like the podcast and find it helpful, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating, hit the subscribe button, and leave a review. All of this helps us grow the podcast and helps new listeners find the show. And share the link with those you know who are experiencing their own grief. The goal of the podcast is to help those like us navigate the confusing emotion that is grief. Let's just talk about briefly how your kids have adapted, maybe, or how they're adjusting to this new way of life, and maybe some of the kids that you see come through Door of Hope as well. What's kind of the 35,000-foot perspective of what you've seen with kids and how they've been dealing with the fires and what has happened?
Yeah. I think it really varies depending on how much their community was impacted and how much their sources of community were impacted, whether that's school or church or all of those rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
So for my kids, the hardest thing, hands down, has been changing schools because their school is within the burn zone area.
Wow.
And then the splintering of their friendship circle. So we everyone who lives in Altadena is in Altadena for the community. And everyone who was at my kids' charter school was there because of the community. It's 2 classes per grade. It's K through 8. You know all the families. Everyone knows your kids' names. And so we parent with a lot of families there, but especially with 3 to 5 families that have girls my girls' age and boys my boys' age. And so, just as an example, every Friday, all the boys were playing indoor soccer at the local park, and then all the girls were typically at a play date at my house, and then all the boys would descend, and it would be absolute madness and chaos at my house on a Friday night. And it was super fun, and we were just all very local, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what they're missing. Now, my daughter's best friends are a 45-minute drive away or a 30-minute drive away. We're all going to different schools.
Yeah.
None of us know what the future looks like. And it's like that for all of us.
I got to imagine, just what COVID did for kids and doing school through home, through a laptop, and now, kids in the Los Angeles area, who've been affected by the fires. It's really a tough time for kids, and they've experienced so much in the last few years. My heart goes out to them. It's so much adjustment.
Absolutely. I keep saying, I know kids are resilient, but I wish that my kids were not given so many opportunities to test that theory.
Yeah.
Just,
Can
it
imagine.
seems, COVID, and then, for me, the separation, and then, other layers of things too. I think someone who was talking to me about this fire said, when devastation like this happens, it just layers on to what already was happening.
Yeah.
Right. And so everyone had a story of, grief or trauma or loss or whatever before this. Right.
Yeah.
And so now this just adds a new layer to what was already going on. But it's interesting with the kids with COVID too. I'm finding that it feels very similar in that I know there was a health risk and cost to COVID, but I also know there was a real social cost to trying to maintain good health. And it's the exact same thing right now. Right? Like, we're having to decide whether we are willing to take the risk to put our kids back in school in an environment that we know is likely unsafe. And yet, we also know that there's a social cost to not doing that.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have to make the best, worst choice out there.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
I can imagine. Couple questions and we'll get you out of there because I know your time is pretty precious. Speak to me a little bit about Door of Hope, where we mentioned you're the CEO of this Christian nonprofit and you're helping those in the area. And I'm wondering, even now, how your experience of losing your home has maybe helped you shape your mission even more. I'm sure you're learning a whole lot more being on the other side, as well as the people that come through your door.
Yeah. No, I'm learning a ton. So before the fire, Door of Hope was sheltering unhoused families and getting them back into their own housing, or preventing access for families who have an eviction notice. And so we were already doing all that work. We were already serving, set to serve over 500 families this year through that work. And so for those families, I'm learning a ton just going through this experience. We always talk about the social service shuffle in my field, where a family who is already frustrated, gets sent to this office and this office and this office and is told to apply for these benefits and these benefits and these benefits, and sometimes they're rejected or sometimes it'll be a bad lead, and just the frustration and the hopelessness that can create is really profound. And now I'm experiencing that, right?
Yeah.
FEMA rejections and insurance that won't respond, and going to get a cash card for fire survivors, and they're shut down for the day. And then the next time I go back, there's a line out the door and I don't have time to wait. And so now I'm living through the social service shuffle and understand how painful that can be. And then I'm also thinking, well, that's for me. I have a car. I have flex time.
Right.
What about people that bus to these resources or that are dislocated an hour and a half away and come with the hope that they're going to get some help and then they don't? So it's teaching me a lot about that. I'm having to front a ton of money right now.
Mm.
Again, with the hope that insurance is going to take care of it.
Yeah.
What if I had no money to front?
Right.
And so, it's way more expensive to be displaced than it is to have your regular rhythm and your regular grocery bill and your regular childcare and all of those kind of things. Post-fire, Door of Hope realized that now there's a whole lot more unhoused people in our community. And if, I talked about the layers, right? So maybe it's grief, maybe it's trauma. Well, one of the layers that was already happening in people's lives, some people's lives, was they were already really low income and they were already living in multi-generational homes, where, not everyone was on the title, or not everyone was on the mortgage, or not everyone was on the lease or the house homeowners insurance. And so there's a whole lot of people in Northwest Altadena, which is a very mixed income community, that now don't have homes and that are truly at risk of long-term homelessness. And so Door of Hope has launched a new program to intervene with those kind of families, try to get them rehoused as quickly as possible, leased up in an apartment, and then help them navigate the next stage.
And for those who are listening who might be interested in wanting to get involved with Door of Hope, where would they go? How could they get involved?
Yeah, the best place is our website, www.doorofhope.us. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook. And there's all kinds of information there and videos there about what we're doing to respond and help fire survivors who are very low-income families, along with the work that we were already doing.
Yeah. No doubt this is a heavy topic, and I appreciate you being so open and sharing, but maybe we can end kind of on a lighter note here. I wanted to ask if there was maybe a moment or a memory from the home that you lived in with your kids that kind of makes you smile, that will kind of always be just a lasting memory in your mind of the house that you lived in.
Yeah, that's makes me smile and cry all at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because it's it's those moments that I'm going to miss the most.
Yeah.
So two things come to mind. One is I had this picture of a pile of kids on my couch, and I think it's 14 kids.
Oh my gosh.
on my couch. That was one of those Friday night things,
Yeah.
right, that I mentioned. Someone once gave me great parenting advice that said, you want to have the home that your kids want to invite their friends to.
Mm.
And so I had done a lot of work to create that home. And but just the joy of absolute chaos, but more importantly, just having that home that my my kids wanted to invite their friends to, and where my kids' friends knew where the snack drawer was
Yeah,
and
yeah.
always felt welcome. So that's a great memory. I think the second memory is my kids sitting on the curb outside of my house with their lemonade stand.
Oh, nice.
We had a lemon tree in the backyard, and this was all new for them to be in a neighborhood where neighbors were out walking. And so we moved. So the first time they did that lemonade stand was on the 4th of July, the week that we moved in. And it became this really magical way to meet the neighbors. So every time they had a customer, I would walk out and meet them. And by that night, I was at a party for my new neighbors, 2 houses down, and had met all the people. And Altadena people are really special. We're all very eclectic, but all kind of the same heart.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was among fast friends right in my neighborhood. So
that's really special. Well, I have a feeling when you finally get to your next home, that home will be the place where your kids will bring all their friends, and it will be known as the home that they can have fun in and relax and invade your refrigerator and just chill out and have a good time.
Yeah, well, I hope so, and I hope that that's sooner than later, but God only knows right now.
Yeah, I do too. But Megan, I can't even begin to imagine what you and the various communities in Los Angeles have gone and continue to go through and to move forward, to rebuild and try to put your lives back together again. And I just really thank you for being so very honest and sharing your story and your kid's story and what Dora Hope does and the feelings that you are going through. And I wish only the best for you and your family, as well as the great work that you and your team does at Dora Hope and serving those who are homeless. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Don't forget about us. You know, the rebuilding will be a long time, and you know better than anyone that grief, you're still in it years later. So thanks for doing the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being a guest. I know for me, there's clothing, photos, and other objects in my home that remind me of Sarah, whether we bought them together or it's looking at a photo of the two of us. They are my last tangible lifeline to Sarah, as I know she saw them, touched them, and we together appreciated and shared them. They still connect me and draw me close to her. I recently read this meditation from the book Healing After Loss, and it focuses on the objects and routines that help us get through the loss of a loved one. It goes like this. When our world is shattered by grief, sometimes the only things that get us through are the familiar objects and routines that say in their very being, look, you have not lost everything. Some things are the same. They make no demands on us, these familiar objects. They are just there. They represent stability in a world that has suddenly fallen to chaos. We are grateful to them in an irrational, embracing way, as though they were dear friends, which, in this crisis, they are. I'd imagine if those who lost their homes were lucky enough to grab what they could before their home burned down, these familiar objects now have even more immense value to them and are dear friends. On a personal note, the most recent fires and ensuing destruction has at times left me speechless. I lived and worked in Los Angeles for 8 years and have so many good friends in the area, and a part of me is still crushed for the city and its people. I watched the news 24/7 while the fires leveled neighborhoods. Sadly, it seems like the national news cycle has forgotten about the people of Los Angeles, and updates are few and far between. So I'll close with this. Please don't forget about Megan, her family, and the thousands like her who are homeless and just trying to rebuild their lives, their homes, and their spirits day by day. Donate if you can, whether time or money or both. And remember, if you are experiencing grief, you are not alone. My thanks to Megan Katerjian. What About Grief is available monthly on all major podcast listening platforms. Please follow the podcast as well as rate and review the show on Apple Podcast. The executive producer of What About Grief is Marsha Anderson. Logo artwork was designed by TED Studios. This episode was recorded at BAM Studios in Chicago. And lastly, feel free to email us at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com.